The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Michelle Cooper stared at her phone, the banking app displaying a balance that made her stomach twist. $432.87. 14 months ago, she had been a senior cybersecurity analyst at Data Shield Defense, with a comfortable six-figure salary, a modern townhouse in the suburbs of Phoenix, and enough savings to secure a future for her son Noah. Now at 36, she was living in a weekly rate motel. She could no longer afford freelancing basic IT work that barely covered their meals and counting every dollar while trying to mask her mounting panic from her 9-year-old son. The massive layoffs at Data Shield had devastated her entire division after the DARPA contract fell through. But Michelle had been particularly blindsided when her position was eliminated entirely. The specialized nature of her cybersecurity expertise, focused on infrastructure vulnerability assessment, made finding comparable work nearly impossible in the current job market. Her high-level security clearance had lapsed during her unemployment, further limiting her options. The child support payments from her ex-husband had stopped completely 3 months ago when he relocated to Singapore for what he called a temporary overseas assignment. His voicemail was always full. His emails, when he bothered to respond, were brief and unhelpful. "You and Noah can always come stay with us, sweetheart," her mother had suggested during their weekly phone call. "The guest room is all yours, and Noah would love being close to his grandparents." But pride and a fierce determination to maintain independence kept Michelle from accepting that lifeline. She had carefully rebuilt her life after her divorce 4 years ago, and the thought of retreating to her parents' home in Colorado felt like admitting complete defeat. She was determined to find her own solution to show Noah that setbacks were temporary and that resilience mattered more than circumstances. As she sat at the small table in their motel room reviewing the final eviction notice from the property manager, the reality was stark and unforgiving. They had exactly 7 days to vacate the premises. 7 days to figure out a miracle. Noah sat cross-legged on one of the twin beds, his sandy brown hair falling across his forehead, as he focused intently on a dog-eared library book about space exploration. Even in their dire circumstances, he had maintained his natural curiosity and optimism, traits Michelle was desperate to preserve. She scrolled absently through local news on her tablet, scanning job listings and affordable housing options that simply didn't exist. The Phoenix housing market was brutal. Rents had skyrocketed, and the few affordable options had waiting lists months long. A small advertisement caught her eye: county foreclosure auction, properties. Starting at $300. Most of the listings were for rundown houses with starting bids well beyond her means, but one property description made her pause. Foreclosed ranch 35 Mi outside of Riverstone, Arizona. Minimum bid $400. As is. Significant damage. No inspection available. Michelle had grown up in rural Colorado, surrounded by open spaces and mountains, before her technical aptitude led her to universities and then corporate offices. She had always promised herself that someday she would give Noah the same childhood experiences room to explore connection to the land, the lessons that came from living closer to nature. But that had been a someday dream, not a desperate last resort. She clicked on the listing photos and frowned. The ranch house was clearly in disrepair, peeling paint, broken windows, and what looked like fire damage to one section of the roof. The surrounding land appeared dry and overgrown, with several outbuildings in various states of collapse. The listing mentioned no functioning utilities possible, structural issues, property sold as is with all contents. The auction was scheduled for tomorrow morning. "What are you looking at, Mom?" Noah asked, peering over her shoulder, his curious eyes examining the screen. Michelle almost closed the browser, not wanting to share her desperate considerations with her son, but something in Noah's expression stopped her. "It's a ranch," she said honestly. "A very old, very broken ranch that's being sold tomorrow." Noah's eyes widened. "Like with horses and a barn and everything?" "Well, there aren't any horses now," Michelle explained. "Someone lost the ranch to the bank, and now it's being sold again. It needs a lot of work." Could we buy it? Noah asked with the straightforward logic of a 9-year-old. You always said you wanted us to have more space someday. Michelle started to explain all the reasons why they couldn't. The repairs, the distance from town, the impracticality of it all, but stopped herself. What were their alternatives? Another overpriced rental that would drain what little remained of her savings. Moving back to her parents' house and admitting defeat. That night, after Noah had gone to bed, Michelle researched everything she could about the property. It was known locally as the Riverstone Ranch, named after the nearby town. For the past 15 years, it had belonged to a retired Air Force colonel named Robert Wilson, who had died without heirs. The previous year, the property taxes had gone unpaid, and the county had foreclosed. The more Michelle read, the more her professional curiosity was piqued. Colonel Wilson had been a mysterious figure in the local community, brilliant but reclusive, known for his paranoia and strange habits. He had retired from service abruptly in 1989 and purchased the remote ranch shortly afterward, rarely venturing into town except for essential supplies. What particularly caught Michelle's attention was Wilson's background. Before his sudden retirement, he had been stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, home to one of America's nuclear missile fields. His retirement had coincided with a classified incident at the base, the details of which remained largely unknown to the public. By morning, Michelle had made her decision. It was risky, possibly foolish, but it also felt like the only path forward that didn't involve retreat. She withdrew $400 from her account, nearly everything she had, and drove to the county courthouse. Noah buckled into the back seat with a backpack full of books, snacks, and his treasured collection of model airplanes. Are we really going to buy a ranch today? Noah asked, his voice caught between excitement and uncertainty. We're going to try, Michelle answered honestly. But it's a long shot, sweetheart. Other people might want it too. At the courthouse, Michelle registered as a bidder and received a numbered paddle. Noah sat beside her in the back row of the auction room, unusually quiet, sensing the importance of the moment. The auctioneer worked through several properties before reaching the Riverstone Ranch. When the listing appeared on the projection screen, Michelle felt her heart race. This was it, their one desperate chance. Next, we have the Riverstone property, 32 acres with ranch house and outbuildings. Significant damage noted. Property sold as is. Opening bid at $400. Do I hear $400? Michelle raised her paddle, her hand trembling slightly. The auctioneer nodded. $400 from bidder 27. Do I hear $500? The room remained silent. Michelle scanned the faces around her, expecting competition, but finding only disinterest or even faint expressions of pity. From the corner of her eye, Michelle noticed an older man in a dark navy suit studying her with unusual intensity. His posture was military straight, his weathered face suggesting a lifetime outdoors. For a moment she thought he might bid, but he remained still. Going once for $400. Going twice for $400. Noah squeezed her hand, not fully understanding what was happening but sensing its significance. Sold to bidder 27 for $400. A wave of emotions crashed over Michelle. Relief, terror, disbelief. She had just spent nearly every dollar she had on a dilapidated property she'd never even visited. As she completed the paperwork and handed over the cashier's check, the clerk gave her a curious look. The Riverstone place, huh? The woman lowered her voice. You should know there's a reason nobody wanted that property. Because of the condition? Michelle asked. The clerk shook her head. That's part of it, sure, but that place has history. Strange history. Old Colonel Wilson spent nearly 3 decades there, hardly leaving. They say he was building something out there, something the government was interested in. The clerk leaned closer. Some folks say it's not just the house that's broken. The land itself feels wrong. Michelle's analytical mind immediately began categorizing the layers of superstition and local rumors that often attach themselves to remote properties. As a cybersecurity specialist, she found such folklore intriguing rather than frightening. I don't believe in curses, she said with a small smile. Just opportunities for problem solving. The clerk shrugged. Your funeral. Keys are in the envelope along with the property maps and deed. As they drove the hour to their new property, Noah's excitement grew. Will we sleep there tonight, Mom, like camping? The thought hadn't occurred to Michelle. Their motel room was paid through tomorrow, but financially it would make sense to move immediately, even into a house without functioning utilities. Maybe, she hedged. We'll need to see what condition it's in first. When they turned onto the long dirt driveway, reality struck hard. The ranch house looked even more dilapidated in person than it had in the photos, a single-story Southwestern-style structure with stucco walls crumbling in places, several broken windows, and a section of roof that had clearly suffered fire damage. The surrounding land was dry and overgrown with desert scrub, and the outbuildings a barn, what looked like a workshop, and several smaller structures were in various states of disrepair. It's perfect, Noah declared, unbuckling his seatbelt before Michelle had fully stopped the car. Noah, wait, Michelle called, but her son was already running toward the house, propelled by the boundless optimism of childhood. Michelle followed more cautiously, mentally cataloging the most urgent repairs. The roof damage was concerning but appeared limited to one section of the house. The foundation seemed solid, though the porch steps had partially collapsed. The front door was secured with a padlock, which Michelle opened with the key from her paperwork. Ready? She asked Noah, who nodded eagerly. The door creaked open on rusted hinges, revealing a dust-filled entrance hall. The air inside was stale and dry, with an underlying mustiness that suggested water damage at some point. Michelle stepped cautiously onto the tile flooring, testing each section before committing her weight. Hello? Noah called out, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. We're your new family. Despite her concerns, Michelle smiled at her son's immediate claim on the space. They moved slowly through the first floor, a living room with a stone fireplace, a dining area, a kitchen with appliances that had to be at least 30 years old, and two small bedrooms with closets. A hallway led to a bathroom with an old-fashioned tub and what appeared to be the master bedroom at the back of the house. Throughout the house, Michelle noted that beneath the layers of dust and neglect, the structure itself was fairly solid. The fire damage was contained to what had been a small office or den, with the roof partially open to the elements, but the structural beams still intact. The ranch house had good bones, as her father would say. The kitchen cabinets contained a few canned goods and basic supplies long expired, but suggesting that Colonel Wilson had departed suddenly or hadn't planned for his absence to be permanent. A calendar on the wall was frozen in time, October 1989, with several dates circled in red marker. Can this be my room? Noah asked, standing in a small bedroom with faded blue wallpaper and built-in bookshelves. If that's the one you want, Michelle agreed, relieved that at least the ceiling appeared solid with no obvious water damage. They explored the rest of the property, finding the outbuildings mostly empty, except for basic tools and equipment. The barn contained a surprise, an old Ford F-150 pickup truck, circa 1972, its faded blue paint still showing hints of its former glory. The tires were flat, and the engine was probably long dead, but otherwise it was remarkably intact, a relic from a bygone era that somehow felt like a good omen. The workshop was padlocked with a different key than the one they had been given. We'll need to find a way into that later, Michelle noted, making a mental inventory of their most pressing needs: water, electricity, and secure shelter. As they circled back to the house, Michelle's attention was drawn to a concrete structure partially buried in the hillside behind the ranch house. Unlike the other buildings, this one appeared to be relatively new and in good condition, a bunker-like entrance with a heavy metal door. What's that? Noah asked, already heading toward it. Careful, Michelle cautioned, following close behind. It looks like some kind of storm shelter or storage cellar. The door was secured with another padlock, different from those on the house or workshop. None of the keys in Michelle's envelope seemed to match it. We'll figure that out later, too, she said, making a note to purchase bolt cutters on their next trip to town. Let's see about making one room livable for tonight. They returned to the house and Michelle checked her phone. No service as expected given their remote location. Another challenge to solve, but one problem at a time. First, shelter and water. By late afternoon, they had cleaned one bedroom enough to make it habitable, and found a working hand pump in the yard that produced cold but clear water when operated with enough effort. A thorough search of the kitchen uncovered some camping supplies, a propane stove with a half-full tank, some basic cookware, and several gallons of water in plastic containers that Michelle decided to use only for washing until she could test the well water. "What do you think, Noah?" Michelle asked, as they sat on the front porch eating sandwiches they'd brought from town. "Should we stay tonight, or go back to the motel one more time?" Noah looked around at the vast open space surrounding their new home, at the mountains in the distance turning purple in the evening light, at the hawk circling lazily overhead. "I want to stay," he said firmly. "This is our ranch now. We should be here." Michelle nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of rightness in her son's decision. Despite the property's obvious challenges, there was something compelling about it, a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in months. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, Michelle noticed a vehicle approaching on the distant road. It slowed as it passed their driveway, then continued on. Probably just a curious neighbor, she thought, but made a mental note to prioritize security measures. Their remote location was both an advantage and a vulnerability. After Noah had fallen asleep wrapped in his sleeping bag on the bedroom floor, with his backpack as a pillow, Michelle sat on the front porch with a notepad making lists by flashlight. The enormity of what she had done hit her in waves. She had spent nearly every dollar she had on a property that most people considered worthless. She had brought her 9-year-old son to live in a house with no functioning utilities. She had traded the little security they had for a massive project with no guarantee of success. "What have I done?" she whispered to the night air. As if in answer, the desert came alive around her, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the distant call of a coyote, the vast canopy of stars overhead, so much clearer here than in the city. Michelle looked up at the star-filled sky, so much more visible here than in Phoenix, and felt a strange certainty settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets this old ranch held, she and Noah were exactly where they were meant to be. The next morning, Michelle woke to sunlight streaming through the curtainless windows, and the sound of Noah already up and exploring. She found him in the kitchen, examining something on the floor with intense concentration. "Mom, come quick, I found something cool in the kitchen." Michelle hurried to join her son, who was pointing excitedly at what appeared to be a normal section of tile flooring near the pantry. "Look, it moves." Noah demonstrated by pressing on one edge of a floor tile, causing the opposite end to rise slightly. Michelle knelt to examine it more closely. It wasn't damage or deterioration, the tile was intentionally installed as a small hidden compartment. She carefully pried it open to reveal a space about the size of a shoebox beneath the floor. Inside was a key, not old like the ones they'd been given with the property, but modern, made of polished steel, with a digital chip embedded in the head, like a high-security access key. "Treasure!" Noah exclaimed. "I knew we'd find treasure in our ranch." Michelle turned the key over in her hand, her cybersecurity training immediately recognizing it as military-grade, the kind used for secure facilities with classified access. The alphanumeric code etched into its side was unlike any civilian key system she had encountered in her work. "What does it open?" Noah asked, excitement dancing in his eyes. "I'm not sure," Michelle replied, though her mind immediately went to the concrete bunker behind the house. "But I think we should be careful with it." They spent the morning exploring the property more thoroughly in daylight. Beyond the main structures they'd seen the previous day, they discovered a small concrete pad that might have once held a satellite dish, a water tank on the hillside that could potentially be restored, and the remains of what appeared to be a helipad, flat circular, and cleared of vegetation even after years of neglect. By midday, practical concerns took precedence over mystery. Michelle drove them back to town to gather their few possessions from the motel, purchase basic supplies, and look into utility connections. At the local hardware store, she struck up a conversation with the owner, an older man named Jack Morris, whose weathered face and calloused hands spoke of a lifetime of practical work. The Riverstone Ranch, huh? Jack's eyebrows rose when Michelle mentioned her purchase. She was surprised to recognize him as the man from the auction who had watched her with such intensity. Brave woman. That property's been sitting empty since Colonel Wilson passed. Before that, it was abandoned for nearly a decade after the previous owners left. I know it needs work, Michelle acknowledged. But the price was right, and it's a chance for a fresh start for my son and me. Jack studied her for a moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. Tell you what, I've got some solar panels and a basic battery system in the back from a job that fell through. Previous customer already paid, then changed plans and went with grid power. You can have them at cost if they'd help you get that place livable. The unexpected kindness brought tears to Michelle's eyes. That would help tremendously. Thank you. Been in this town my whole life, Jack said, waving off her gratitude. Served with the Navy SEALs for 20 years before coming back to take over my dad's store. The Riverstone place was good land before all the strange business with the colonel. Would be good to see it come back to life. He hesitated, then added, You might want to talk to Margaret Hayes at the library. She and Colonel Wilson had some kind of friendship years ago. If anyone knows what he was really doing out there, it's Margaret. Michelle made a mental note to visit the library both for information about the ranch and to inquire about internet access options. Perhaps there might eventually be remote work opportunities related to her cybersecurity background once they had reliable connectivity. As Jack helped load the solar panels into her car, he studied her with the assessing gaze of someone used to sizing up situations and people quickly. You got experience with this kind of setup. Off-grid living isn't for everyone. I grew up in rural Colorado, Michelle replied. And I've got a technical background. I can figure it out. Jack nodded, seemingly satisfied. I'll swing by tomorrow with some tools and help you get those panels set up. Bring my truck to haul away some of that debris, too. When Michelle started to protest, he held up a calloused hand. Consider it a welcome to Riverstone. Town's too small to not look out for each other. By evening, they had arranged for a utility assessment the following week, purchased enough supplies to make the house minimally functional, and loaded their car with the remainder of their possessions from the motel. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, casting an amber glow across the desert landscape. As Michelle unloaded their supplies, she noticed a black SUV parked on the road at the edge of the property line. A man in a dark suit stood beside it, watching them through binoculars. After a moment's hesitation, Michelle approached, protective instincts on alert. "Can I help you?" she called when she was within speaking distance. The man lowered the binoculars. He was in his 50s with close-cropped gray hair and the rigid posture of someone with military training. "Name's Reynolds," he said without offering a hand to shake. "Department of Energy." Michelle immediately recognized the cover designation often used by certain government agencies. Her years in defense contracting had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of someone not being entirely forthcoming about their affiliation. "Michelle Cooper," she replied. "My son and I just bought this property yesterday." Figured as much. Reynolds's eyes scanned the ranch house and outbuildings with practiced efficiency. "Planning to stay long?" "That's the idea," Michelle said, measuring her words carefully. "Is there something I should know about this property, Mr. Reynolds?" The man's expression revealed nothing. Just standard monitoring of former government employees' residences. Colonel Wilson worked on some sensitive projects. Protocol requires periodic checks of his known locations. It was a plausible explanation, but Michelle's instincts, honed by years of security work, told her there was more to the story. "Well, now it's my residence, and I'd appreciate advance notice of any future periodic checks." Reynolds nodded slightly. "Of course, Ms. Cooper. Have you found anything unusual on the property? Papers, storage devices, equipment?" The key hidden beneath the kitchen floor seemed to burn in Michelle's pocket, but she maintained a neutral expression. "Just dust and spiderwebs so far. If I find the Colonel's stamp collection, should I call the Department of Energy?" The slight narrowing of Reynolds's eyes told Michelle her sarcasm had hit a nerve. "Here's my card. If you find anything that seems military in nature, I'd appreciate a call. As Reynolds turned to leave, he paused. One more thing. There's been some unauthorized activity around this property over the years. People interested in the Colonel's work. I wouldn't go exploring any structures beyond the main house until we've had a chance to verify they're safe, especially not with a child around. With that cryptic warning, he climbed into the SUV and drove away, leaving Michelle with more questions than answers about their new home. That night, after another makeshift dinner and getting Noah settled to sleep, Michelle's curiosity drew her back to the concrete bunker behind the house. With a better flashlight purchased in town and the bolt cutter she'd bought from Jack's hardware store, she approached the heavy metal door. The padlock was serious business, hardened steel with a shrouded shackle that made it resistant to cutting. After several minutes of struggle, Michelle managed to break it open, the lock falling to the ground with a heavy thud. The door itself was even more formidable, steel-reinforced concrete with an electronic keypad beside it. The keypad appeared dead, its display dark. But Michelle noticed something else. A small recessed panel beneath it with what looked like a key slot. Heart pounding, Michelle took out the steel key they'd found under the kitchen floor. It fit perfectly into the slot. She hesitated suddenly, aware of the silence pressing around her in the dark desert night. Reynolds's warning echoed in her mind. Was this what he had been concerned about? But her professional curiosity won out. Slowly she turned the key. A soft hum emanated from the door as dormant systems powered up. The keypad display flickered to life, glowing green in the darkness, displaying a single message. Authorization accepted. Welcome back, Colonel Wilson. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a dimly lit concrete stairwell descending into darkness. Emergency lights flickered to life along the walls as Michelle took her first tentative steps inside. The air smelled stale, but not unpleasant, surprisingly clean and regulated compared to the abandoned ranch house above. The stairwell extended about 20 feet down before opening into a corridor lined with polished metal panels. Michelle moved cautiously, her security training kicking in as she scanned for cameras or motion sensors. The facility appeared to be running on backup power with only essential systems operational. At the end of the corridor stood another door, this one more sophisticated than the entrance, with both a keypad and a biometric scanner. For a moment, Michelle considered turning back. Whatever Colonel Wilson had built here was clearly designed to remain hidden, and Reynolds's warning now seemed more ominous than bureaucratic. But the analytical part of her mind that had made her an excellent security analyst pushed her forward. If there was something dangerous here, she needed to know for Noah's safety. The keypad beside this inner door was active, awaiting input. Without a code, Michelle expected to be locked out. But when she examined the biometric scanner more closely, she noticed something unusual. A small note taped to its side, yellowed with age, but clearly preserved in the controlled environment. In precise handwriting, it read, Contingency Access 7476. July 4th, 1976. American Bicentennial. A date any patriotic military officer would remember. Michelle tried the numbers on the keypad. To her surprise, the door unlocked with a series of metallic clicks. Authorization granted. Secondary protocol engaged, announced a computerized voice as the door swung open. Michelle gasped at what lay beyond. The room was massive, at least 3,000 square feet of underground space filled with computer equipment, workstations, and what appeared to be a sophisticated communication center. The technology was a strange mix of eras, some equipment clearly from the late 1980s, when Wilson had first acquired the property, while other systems looked more advanced, as if they had been upgraded over time. Most surprising was that everything appeared to be functional, running on what must be an independent power source. Soft lights illuminated the space, and cooling fans hummed quietly, keeping the equipment at optimal temperature. "What were you working on, Colonel?" Michelle whispered to the empty room. As if in response, a large central monitor flickered to life, displaying a simple prompt: Voice authentication recognized, access level guessed, limited functionality available. The system had somehow registered her voice and granted restricted access. Michelle approached the central workstation, where multiple screens displayed various data feeds, some showing what appeared to be security camera footage of the ranch perimeter, others scrolling through lines of code or displaying complex schematics. On the main desk sat a leather-bound journal carefully positioned as if left intentionally for whoever found this place. Michelle opened it, recognizing the same precise handwriting from the note at the scanner. If you're reading this, I am gone, and you have found what I have worked to protect for nearly 3 decades, the journal began. My name is Colonel Robert Wilson, former Director of Special Projects at the Defense Nuclear Agency. What you have discovered is not merely a bunker, but a secure fallback facility designed to preserve critical protocols in the event of catastrophic system failure at the Pentagon. Michelle's heart raced as she continued reading. The journal detailed how in 1989, Wilson had been tasked with developing contingency measures following a near miss in the nuclear command and control systems during the Able Archer exercises. During that process, he discovered critical vulnerabilities that could potentially be exploited, flaws in the authentication protocols that might allow unauthorized nuclear launch commands to be processed if certain systems were compromised. I presented my findings to my superiors, Wilson had written, only to discover that certain elements within our government preferred these vulnerabilities remain in place, backdoors that could be utilized in circumstances deemed necessary by those not in the official chain of command. Wilson described how he had secretly developed corrected protocols and secure authentication measures, creating backup systems that would prevent any unauthorized access to nuclear launch capabilities. When he realized his work was being monitored and would likely be confiscated, he made the decision to take the only copy of the corrected protocols and disappear. I did not defect or betray my country, he insisted in his neat handwriting. I acted to protect it from those who would circumvent the safeguards put in place to prevent nuclear catastrophe. The protocols contained in this facility are the only existing copies of the correct authentication procedures, the ones without the deliberate vulnerabilities. Michelle sat back in the chair, the implications hitting her like a physical blow. If Wilson's account was accurate, she had stumbled upon classified nuclear protocols that had been missing from Pentagon records for over 30 years, materials that both legitimate government agencies and potentially other interests would be desperate to recover. The final pages of the journal took a more personal turn. I have lived in isolation for decades, periodically updating these systems and monitoring attempts to locate me. My cancer diagnosis makes it clear I will not be able to continue this vigil much longer. Rather than destroy this facility, I have decided to leave it intact, protected but discoverable by someone with the right combination of skill, need, and perhaps destiny. If you are reading this, you are that person. The entry concluded with specific instructions. Trust no one who claims government authority without multiple verifications. The individuals who wanted these backdoors preserved are patient and have likely maintained their influence. The protocols must eventually be returned to legitimate authorities, but only under circumstances that ensure they will be implemented rather than buried again. Michelle closed the journal, her mind racing with the implications. She was now in possession of highly classified materials that multiple parties might kill to obtain or to keep hidden. And she had a 9-year-old son sleeping peacefully in a run-down ranch house above, unaware that their new home had just become potentially the most dangerous place for them to be. A noise from one of the security monitors caught her attention, headlights approaching on the distant road leading to the ranch. Michelle quickly gathered the journal and scanned the bunker for anything else immediately useful. On a shelf near the workstation, she found a satellite phone, a small hard drive labeled Primary Protocols, encrypted, and what appeared to be a government-issue handgun in a lockbox. She took the phone and hard drive, but left the weapon. She had never been comfortable with guns, and introducing one into a house with a curious 9-year-old seemed more dangerous than protective. Before leaving, Michelle noticed a control panel labeled Security Systems. One switch was marked Perimeter Alert Disabled, She flipped it to Enabled and was rewarded with a series of green lights illuminating on the panel. Michelle carefully retraced her steps, securing each door behind her. By the time she emerged from the bunker, the vehicle she had spotted on the monitor was turning into their driveway, the same black SUV from earlier. Reynolds had returned, and at nearly midnight, his visit was unlikely to be a casual follow-up. Moving quickly but quietly, Michelle slipped back into the house through the rear door and checked on Noah, who was still soundly asleep. She hid the journal, hard drive, and satellite phone in her backpack, then took a deep breath and went to answer the insistent knocking at the front door. Reynolds stood on the porch, flanked by another man in similar dark clothing. Both had the alert, tense posture of agents expecting trouble. "Ms. Cooper," Reynolds said without preamble, "we need to inspect the property immediately. We have reason to believe there may be hazardous materials left by the previous owner." "At midnight," Michelle challenged, blocking the doorway. "I think not. My son is sleeping, and you have no legal right to enter our home without a warrant." Reynolds's expression hardened. "This isn't a standard situation, Ms. Cooper. Colonel Wilson was involved with classified research. Certain protocols require immediate action when his monitoring systems are activated." The implication was clear. They knew she had entered the bunker. The security system she had enabled must have sent an alert to whatever agency Reynolds actually represented. "I'll be happy to discuss this in the morning," Michelle insisted, her voice calm, despite her racing heart, "with proper documentation and during reasonable hours. Until then, I must ask you to leave my property." The second agent stepped forward, his hand moving subtly toward his jacket, but Reynolds stopped him with a slight gesture. "We'll return at 8:00 a.m. Reynolds said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "I strongly advise you not to explore any more of the Colonel's renovations before then, for your safety and your son's." As they turned to leave, Reynolds added, "And Ms. Cooper, if you found anything unusual, bringing it to our attention immediately would be in everyone's best interest." Michelle watched them drive away, her security training screaming that they wouldn't simply wait until morning. Whatever she had stumbled upon, it was significant enough that Reynolds would likely call for backup and possibly surveillance overnight. She needed help, but who could she trust? Her former security clearance had taught her that standard law enforcement would defer to federal agencies in matters like this. Her former colleagues at DataShield might have contacts who could verify Reynolds' credentials, but reaching out to them might also alert others to her discovery. The satellite phone from the bunker offered a potential solution. If Wilson had been as thorough as his journal suggested, he might have programmed trusted contacts into it, people who could help navigate this situation. Michelle retrieved the phone from her backpack and powered it on. The device activated without requiring a password, displaying a simple interface with only 3 contacts saved, labeled only as Contingency 1, Contingency 2, and Verification. Michelle selected the third option, reasoning that before reaching out for help, she should confirm whether Wilson's concerns were legitimate or the paranoid delusions of an isolated man. The call connected after several rings, and a cautious female voice answered. "Authentication point. Please provide identifier." Michelle hesitated, then remembered the code from the inner door. July 4th, 76. A pause, then. "Identity not recognized, but contingency code accepted. Please state the nature of your inquiry." "I found Robert Wilson's facility," Michelle said carefully. "I need to verify whether his concerns were justified." Another pause, longer this time. "Understood. Verification protocol initiated. Your location has been traced via this connection. If your situation is genuine, expect contact within 3 hours. Maintain position and avoid further communication with other parties." The call ended abruptly, leaving Michelle with more questions than answers. Had she just made a terrible mistake? Or had she reached legitimate allies who could help untangle the dangerous situation she found herself in? With no way to know for certain, Michelle focused on what she could control. She quickly packed essential items for herself and Noah: clothes, food, the important documents from her backpack, and the materials from Wilson's bunker. If they needed to leave quickly, they would be ready. Next, she implemented basic security measures, checking all windows and doors, positioning furniture to create noise if anyone tried to enter silently, and setting up her phone to record any activity near the house. Her years in cybersecurity had included some physical security training, and she applied those principles as best she could with limited resources. Finally, Michelle reviewed the journal more thoroughly, looking for any information that might help them navigate the immediate threat. Wilson had included a section titled Verification Protocols, with instructions for confirming the legitimacy of any government representatives. True Defense Nuclear Agency personnel will carry credentials with a specific holographic marker in the lower right corner, a small pentagon within a circle. Additionally, legitimate agents will be able to provide a daily verification code when asked for today's contingency identifier. If they cannot provide this, they are either imposters or operating outside official channels. Armed with this information, Michelle felt marginally more prepared to face Reynolds in the morning, assuming the contact promised by the verification call arrived first. As she completed her preparations, Michelle checked on Noah again, watching his peaceful sleep with a mixture of love and worry. Just days ago, her biggest concern had been finding affordable housing. Now she was potentially at the center of a decades-old government conspiracy involving nuclear launch protocols. "I'm going to keep you safe," she whispered to her sleeping son. "Whatever it takes." Around 2:30 a.m., Michelle's alertness was rewarded by the sound of tires on gravel, not approaching the house directly, but stopping some distance away on the access road. She moved cautiously to the window and observed a vehicle with its lights off, parked at the edge of the property. A single figure emerged and began moving toward the house, taking a careful route that suggested they were avoiding potential surveillance. Michelle positioned herself near the front door, the satellite phone in one hand and a heavy flashlight in the other. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The soft knock when it came was barely audible. "Ms. Cooper?" A woman's voice called quietly. "I'm here regarding the verification call. I'm alone and unarmed." Michelle opened the door, a cracked chain still engaged. The woman outside appeared to be in her 60s with silver hair and the crisp bearing of someone with military background despite her civilian clothes. "Show me your credentials," Michelle demanded. The woman held up an ID card. "Admiral Elizabeth Reynolds, retired. I was Naval Intelligence Liaison to the Defense Nuclear Agency during Wilson's tenure." Reynolds. Michelle's suspicion immediately deepened. "Any relation to the man who visited earlier?" "No relation by blood," the woman replied grimly. "But he works for people I once trusted. May I come in? It's not safe to talk outside." Michelle examined the ID carefully. "How do I know you're really here to help?" "Because I'm the one who helped Robert disappear in '89, Admiral Reynolds replied. "He found vulnerabilities that certain parties wanted to exploit back doors into the nuclear launch authentication system. When he refused to cooperate, he became a liability." The journal mentioned contingency identifiers as verification, Michelle pressed. Admiral Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Today's identifier is Broken Arrow Sunrise. Robert designed the system to generate new codes daily based on a complex algorithm. Only legitimate DNA personnel would have access to them." This matched what Wilson had written. Michelle removed the chain and allowed the woman to enter. "We don't have much time," Admiral Reynolds said once inside. "Thomas Reynolds works for a private intelligence firm with deep government connections, same people who wanted Wilson's findings buried 30 years ago. They've been searching for this place since Robert disappeared." "Why not just raid the property after Wilson died?" Michelle asked. "They didn't know exactly what he had built or where." Robert was clever. The property records show a simple ranch house with no indications of the bunker. They've been monitoring but couldn't justify a full search without raising questions. Your purchase and subsequent activation of the systems forced their hand. Admiral Reynolds glanced toward the room where Noah slept. "You have a child," Michelle nodded. "My son Noah, he's 9. "That complicates things," the Admiral said grimly. "They won't hesitate to use him as leverage." Fear and determination crystallized into resolve in Michelle's mind. "What do we do? We get you and your son to safety, then secure the protocols, Admiral Reynolds said decisively. I have a team of trusted former colleagues standing by, but we need to move before Thomas Reynolds returns with reinforcements. How do I know I can trust you? Michelle asked the security analyst in her still cautious. Admiral Reynolds met her gaze directly. You don't. But consider this. If I wanted those protocols for nefarious purposes, I would have brought a team and taken them by force. Instead, I'm here alone asking for your cooperation. It wasn't perfect assurance, but it was the best available option. Michelle nodded. I'll wake Noah. Within 20 minutes, they were packed and ready. Michelle had retrieved the hard drive and journal from their hiding place, and Admiral Reynolds had done a quick sweep of the house to ensure they weren't leaving anything critical behind. What about the bunker itself? Michelle asked as they prepared to leave. My team will secure it properly once we're gone, the Admiral replied. The facility contains more than just the protocols, it has evidence of who was involved in the attempt to create nuclear launch backdoors. That evidence is just as important as the protocols themselves. As they stepped outside, the pre-dawn desert was silent and still. Admiral Reynolds's vehicle, an unmarked SUV with government plates, waited at the edge of the property. Stay close and move quickly, she instructed. My associate is watching the access road, but Thomas Reynolds could return at any time. Noah, still groggy from being awakened so early, held Michelle's hand tightly. Mom, what's happening? Why are we leaving? Michelle knelt to her son's level. Remember how we talked about adventures sometimes being unexpected? This is one of those times. We need to go with Admiral Reynolds for a little while until some things get sorted out. Noah studied the older woman with a child's directness. Are you one of the good guys? Admiral Reynolds' stern expression softened slightly. I've spent my life trying to be young man. This simple answer seemed to satisfy Noah, who nodded solemnly. Okay, but we're coming back to our ranch, right? I didn't even get to explore the barn yet. We'll do everything possible to make that happen. Admiral Reynolds promised, meeting Michelle's eyes over Noah's head with a look that acknowledged the uncertainty of that promise. As they approached the vehicle, a flash of headlights on the main road caught Michelle's attention. Someone's coming, she warned. Admiral Reynolds quickened their pace. Into the vehicle now. They had just reached the SUV when the approaching vehicle turned onto their access road, high beams illuminating them clearly. It was Thomas Reynolds's black SUV, and it was moving fast. Get in and stay down, Admiral Reynolds ordered, opening the rear door for Michelle and Noah before sliding into the driver's seat. A man Michelle hadn't noticed before sat in the passenger seat, already speaking rapidly into a secure radio. Hostiles approaching. Protocol Omega in effect. I repeat, Protocol Omega. As soon as their doors closed, Admiral Reynolds accelerated down a barely visible track, leading away from the main drive, her driving expert and controlled despite the rough terrain. Behind them, Thomas Reynolds's vehicle skidded to a stop at the ranch house. Multiple figures emerged with flashlights and what appeared to be weapons drawn. They're searching the house first, the man in the passenger seat reported. That gives us about 3 minutes before they realize we've gone off-road. Michelle held Noah close, trying to shield him from seeing the armed men at their home. Where are we going? She asked. Secure facility about 2 hours from here. Admiral Reynolds answered her attention on navigating the difficult terrain in the pre-dawn light. Off the grid, untraceable. We'll regroup there and determine next steps. As they bounced along the rough desert track, Michelle looked back at the ranch house, their home for barely 48 hours now, swarming with unknown operatives. The bunker, the protocols, the entire situation seemed surreal compared to her desperate financial straits just days earlier. I'm sorry I got us into this, Noah, she whispered to her son. Noah, remarkably calm given the circumstances, looked up at her with trust in his eyes. You didn't do anything wrong, Mom. We found a mystery, that's all. And mysteries are supposed to be solved. His simple confidence steadied her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The SUV crested a ridge just as the sun began to rise over the desert mountains, bathing everything in golden light. Behind them in the distance, Michelle could see vehicles beginning to fan out from the ranch house in search patterns. Don't worry, Admiral Reynolds said. noting Michelle's backward glance. "We'll be long gone before they figure out which way we went. And by tonight, we'll have enough evidence secured to bring this whole operation into the light." As they drove into the rising sun, Michelle held the hard drive containing Wilson's nuclear protocols close. She had wanted a fresh start, a new beginning for herself and Noah. She had found that, and more, a purpose greater than herself, a mystery, 3 decades in the making, and perhaps the chance to protect her nation from vulnerabilities hidden in its most critical security systems. The ranch had cost her last $400. But what she'd discovered there was truly priceless, a chance to make a difference that went far beyond her personal struggles. Dawn stretched its golden fingers across the rugged Arizona landscape as Admiral Reynolds's SUV navigated the winding desert trails, kicking up plumes of dust that glowed like fire in the early morning light. They had been driving for nearly 2 hours, following routes that appeared on no official maps, the terrain growing increasingly remote. Michelle glanced at Noah, who had finally drifted back to sleep against her shoulder, his face peaceful despite the chaos that had engulfed their lives. 5 minutes out, the man in the passenger seat announced. Michelle had learned his name was Commander Davis, a former Navy intelligence officer who had served under Admiral Reynolds before joining her unofficial network of veterans dedicated to national security threats that operated outside normal channels. The SUV rounded a rocky outcropping, revealing what appeared to be an abandoned mining operation built into the side of a rust-colored mesa. Old equipment lay scattered about, weathered by decades of desert sun, creating the perfect illusion of neglect and abandonment. "Welcome to Sanctuary," Admiral Reynolds said, as she guided the vehicle toward what looked like a dilapidated equipment shed. With the press of a button on a small remote, a section of the ground silently slid aside, revealing a ramp leading underground. The SUV descended into a well-lit tunnel that sealed itself behind them. The facility that opened before them defied Michelle's expectations. What had appeared to be an abandoned mine from the outside was actually a sophisticated operations center with modern technology seamlessly integrated into the natural rock formations. The main chamber was a vast cavern that had been transformed into a high-tech command center with multiple workstations, communications equipment, and security monitors covering every approach to the facility. One of several facilities established off the books by intelligence veterans who recognized the need for truly secure locations outside official channels, Admiral Reynolds explained as they parked. Funded by private resources maintained by people who dedicated their lives to national security but discovered threats coming from within certain power structures. A dozen people worked at various stations, some monitoring security feeds, others analyzing data on multiple screens. The operation had the precision and professionalism of a government installation, but clearly operated independently. "These are all former intelligence and military personnel?" Michelle asked, noting the disciplined efficiency of the team. "Most of us," Reynolds confirmed. "After decades serving our country, we discovered that some threats couldn't be addressed through official channels, individuals and groups pursuing agendas contrary to national security, but protected by their positions or connections. We created this network to address threats that official channels can't or won't touch." They were led to a comfortable suite of rooms where food, clean clothes, and basic necessities had been prepared. A doctor introduced as a former Navy flight surgeon gave Noah a quick checkup, pronouncing him healthy, but recommending rest after the stressful night. "Get some sleep," Admiral Reynolds advised once they were settled. "Once you're rested, we'll need to debrief you fully on what you found at Wilson's bunker." Left alone with Noah, Michelle helped him change into clean clothes and settle into what would be their temporary home. Despite the extraordinary circumstances, he seemed to be adapting with remarkable resilience. "Is this like a secret superhero base, Mom?" he asked as he explored the room with curious enthusiasm. Michelle smiled despite her exhaustion. "Something like that. These people are working to protect important information." "Like the treasure we found at our ranch?" Noah asked perceptively. "Exactly like that. Michelle confirmed, once again impressed by her son's intuitive understanding. That's why we needed to come here, to keep it safe until we can give it to the right people. After Noah had eaten and settled in with some books and games thoughtfully provided by their hosts, Michelle allowed herself a few hours of restless sleep. The events of the past 48 hours played through her mind like a surreal film, from the desperation of near homelessness to finding herself at the center of what appeared to be a decades-old conspiracy involving nuclear security protocols. Michelle was awakened by a gentle knock at the door. An assistant informed her that Admiral Reynolds was ready for the debriefing if she felt up to it. Checking on Noah, who was happily engaged with a retired intelligence analyst teaching him the basics of chess, Michelle followed the assistant to a secure conference room where Admiral Reynolds waited with three others: a former CIA analyst in his 70s, a retired Air Force general, and a civilian cybersecurity expert about Michelle's age. "Now," Reynolds said as Michelle took a seat, "tell us exactly what you found." Michelle recounted everything in detail: the hidden key, the bunker's sophisticated security, Wilson's journal, and the encrypted hard drive containing the nuclear protocols. As she spoke, she noticed the increasingly grave expressions of her listeners. "If Wilson's claims are accurate," the Air Force general said when she had finished, "this represents one of the most significant breaches of nuclear security protocols in our history. Creating backdoor access to launch authentication would violate every safeguard we've established since the Cold War. Wilson's record suggests we should take his claims seriously," the CIA analyst added. "His expertise in nuclear command and control systems was unparalleled. If he identified vulnerabilities, they almost certainly existed. The question is whether they still exist." Wilson disappeared with these corrected protocols 30 years ago. Michelle pointed out her cybersecurity background, helping her focus on the practical implications. "The entire system has been updated multiple times since then." "True," the cybersecurity expert acknowledged, "but core authentication architecture often remains consistent through updates. Backdoors inserted at the foundational level can persist for decades if they're subtly implemented. And if the same people who wanted these vulnerabilities in 1989 remained in positions of influence?" The implication hung heavily in the air. Someone had wanted the ability to circumvent normal authorization channels for nuclear weapons, and might still have that capability. "We need to decrypt Wilson's protocols and compare them to current systems," Admiral Reynolds decided. "Ms. Cooper, given your cybersecurity background, your assistance would be valuable. The rest of us have been away from active duty too long to be familiar with current systems." Michelle hesitated, thinking of Noah. "My son will be completely safe here," Reynolds assured her. "We have families of our own. This facility was designed to accommodate children when necessary." After confirming that Noah would be well cared for, Michelle agreed to help. She was led to a specialized cybersecurity lab where Wilson's hard drive waited. The tech specialist, a former NSA cryptographer, had already begun preliminary analysis. "The encryption is military grade, circa early 1990s, he explained. "Formidable for its time, but potentially vulnerable to modern decryption methods. Wilson may have also left clues to the decryption key in his journal or elsewhere in the bunker." Michelle spent hours reviewing Wilson's journal while advanced decryption algorithms ran against the hard drive security. The journal revealed a brilliant but increasingly isolated man, deeply patriotic, yet disillusioned by what he saw as corruption within the systems he had dedicated his life to protecting. "He mentioned something called Harmony Failsafe repeatedly," Michelle noted, showing the relevant passages to the team. The cybersecurity expert entered the term into their decryption program. After several tense minutes, the screen flashed green. "Decryption successful." The contents of the drive revealed themselves: thousands of pages of technical documentation, authentication protocols, and system architecture diagrams for nuclear command and control systems. Most significantly, Wilson had included detailed analysis of the vulnerabilities he had discovered and the corrected protocols he had developed to address them. "This confirms Wilson's claims," the Air Force general said gravely after reviewing the key documents. These backdoors would allow someone with the right access codes to bypass the two-person authentication requirement for nuclear launch orders. The question is whether these vulnerabilities were ever addressed after Wilson disappeared with the corrected protocols. The team worked through the night comparing Wilson's documentation with what they could access of current systems. Michelle's recent cybersecurity experience proved invaluable, allowing her to identify where legacy code might still exist within updated frameworks. By morning, they had their answer, and it was disturbing. The core vulnerability Wilson identified appears to still exist in current systems, Michelle reported, showing the analysis on her screen. It's been obscured by layers of updates and security measures, but the fundamental backdoor remains. Who could access it? Reynolds asked. Based on Wilson's documentation, it would require both specialized knowledge of the vulnerability and high-level access codes. We're talking about a very small group of people, likely within the Defense Department or intelligence community. The implications were chilling. For 3 decades, a select few individuals had potentially held the ability to circumvent established nuclear safeguards, a power that should never have existed outside the official chain of command. We need to take this to legitimate authorities, the CIA analyst argued. This transcends politics or personal agendas. Carefully, Reynolds cautioned. The same interests that drove Wilson into hiding and sent Thomas Reynolds after Ms. Cooper are still out there. If we move too publicly, the evidence could be destroyed and the vulnerability quietly preserved. A plan began to take shape. They would prepare a comprehensive briefing package documenting both Wilson's original findings and their current analysis. This would be simultaneously delivered to multiple authorities: the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Chiefs, key congressional oversight committees, and trusted journalists who could ensure the information couldn't be buried. Before we proceed, there's something else we need to address, Reynolds said, turning to Michelle. Thomas Reynolds and his team know you discovered Wilson's bunker. They'll assume you have the protocols. Even after we've released this information, you and your son will remain targets. The reality of their situation hit Michelle anew. The momentary safety of sanctuary was temporary. Eventually, she and Noah would need to rebuild their lives, and they would do so with powerful enemies aware of their existence. We can offer you new identities, Reynolds continued. Relocation, financial support, a fresh start somewhere safe. The prospect of disappearing, abandoning the ranch they had just purchased, starting over yet again in an unfamiliar place, felt like another defeat. Michelle had spent her life building expertise credentials, a professional reputation. To lose all that to raise Noah under a false identity. There is another option, the Air Force general suggested, seeming to read her hesitation. Once this information becomes public, Reynolds and his associates will be exposed. With enough political pressure and media attention, they could be neutralized through legitimate channels: investigation, prosecution, removal from positions of influence. You mean we could potentially return to our normal lives to the ranch? Michelle asked, hardly daring to hope. Not immediately, Reynolds cautioned. But eventually, yes. It would require courage. You'd need to be a public witness to what you discovered. There would be hearings, depositions, possibly trials. But you wouldn't need to hide forever. The choice crystallized in Michelle's mind. Running might be safer in the short term, but what lesson would that teach Noah? That when confronted with corruption and danger, the right response was to disappear. The very resilience she had wanted to model for him demanded a different path. I want my son to see that standing for truth matters, Michelle said firmly. We'll take the second option, whatever it takes to address this properly and reclaim our lives. Admiral Reynolds nodded with approval. I was hoping you'd say that. Courage like yours is exactly what our country needs right now. They spent the next 2 days preparing the comprehensive briefing package. Michelle worked alongside the team, her cybersecurity expertise helping translate Wilson's technical documentation into clear evidence that could be understood by non-specialists. Meanwhile, Noah was flourishing in the facility where several staff members had taken him under their wing, providing impromptu lessons in everything from basic cryptography to desert ecology. On the third morning, Michelle was surprised to find Noah engaged in what appeared to be a chess lesson with the retired CIA analyst. "Your son has a remarkable mind," the analyst told her as Noah carefully considered his next move. "Strategic thinking, pattern recognition, adaptability, all the qualities we used to look for in potential intelligence officers." "I'm going to be a cybersecurity expert like Mom," Noah declared confidently, moving his bishop to capture the analyst's knight. "But I'm also going to raise horses on our ranch." Michelle smiled at his unwavering certainty that they would return to the ranch, a home they had occupied for less than 2 days, but which had already claimed a special place in his heart. Later that day, Admiral Reynolds called a final meeting to review their strategy. The briefing packages were ready, and trusted couriers were prepared to deliver them simultaneously to ensure no single point of interception could prevent the information from becoming public. "Once this is delivered, events will move quickly," Reynolds warned. "We'll need to be ready to present you for testimony within 48 hours, Ms. Cooper. That's the critical window when your first-hand account will have the most impact." Michelle nodded, feeling a strange calm despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. "I'm ready." "There's something else you should know," Reynolds added, sliding a folder across the table. "We've been investigating Thomas Reynolds and his associates. They're part of a private intelligence firm called Sentinel Global, with deep connections to certain defense contractors and political figures." Michelle opened the folder to find detailed profiles of several individuals, including Thomas Reynolds. "These people have been working together for decades," she noted, seeing the intertwined career paths. "Yes, and they've accumulated significant influence. What Wilson discovered threatened not just their careers, but potentially billions in defense contracts and political capital. They've had 30 years to entrench themselves further. So even with all this evidence, there's no guarantee they'll be held accountable," Michelle realized. "There are never guarantees in this line of work," the Air Force general acknowledged. "But the vulnerabilities in the nuclear command systems that will have to be addressed regardless of who takes the fall politically. The technical fixes Wilson developed can finally be implemented, and that's what matters most." "Ensuring the systems are secure," Michelle agreed. "That's the priority." That evening, as the couriers departed with their critical information packages, Michelle sat with Noah on an observation platform built into the hillside above the hidden facility. The desert sunset painted the landscape in brilliant oranges and purples, a natural beauty that stood in stark contrast to the human dangers they faced. "Are we going home soon?" Noah asked, leaning against her shoulder. "Not just yet," Michelle answered honestly. "First, I need to help some important people understand what we found at the ranch. It might take a little time and it might be difficult, but it's necessary." Noah considered this with the directness only children can manage. "Like when you made me go to the dentist even though I was scared because it was necessary." Michelle laughed softly. "Something like that, though a bit more complicated." "Is it because of what was in the secret bunker, the treasure?" "Yes. What we found wasn't exactly treasure. It was information, very important information that can help keep people safe." Noah nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. "When we go back to the ranch, can we fix it up? Make it really nice?" "That's the plan," Michelle assured him, hoping she could keep that promise. "We'll repair the roof, fix the plumbing, maybe even look into solar power so we're not dependent on the electrical grid." "And horses," Noah added firmly. "A ranch needs horses." "Eventually," Michelle smiled. "One step at a time." As darkness fell, bringing out the vast canopy of stars overhead, Michelle reflected on the extraordinary turn their lives had taken. Just days ago, she had been facing eviction, her professional identity in tatters, her future uncertain. Now she stood at the center of a 3-decade-old conspiracy involving nuclear command systems, preparing to testify before the highest levels of government. The journey ahead would be challenging. There would be those who would try to discredit her, to minimize Wilson's discoveries, to protect the status quo. But for the first time in months, Michelle felt the full force of her capabilities reawakening. She had spent years developing expertise in cybersecurity precisely to protect critical systems from exploitation. Now she had the opportunity to apply that expertise to perhaps the most important security vulnerability possible. Admiral Reynolds joined them on the observation platform, her normally stern expression softened by the evening light. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she remarked, gazing at the star-filled sky. "Worth protecting." "That's what I keep thinking," Michelle agreed. "When I was working in corporate cybersecurity, I sometimes lost sight of the bigger picture, why security matters in the first place. It's not about systems or protocols or even institutions, it's about people, lives, futures." She glanced at Noah. "Like his?" Reynolds nodded. "Exactly. That's why what we're doing matters regardless of personal risk." "When I bought that ranch, I was just trying to keep a roof over our heads," Michelle said. "I never imagined I'd end up helping secure the nation's nuclear command systems." "Life rarely follows the paths we expect," Reynolds replied with a rare smile. "The question is how we respond when it veers into unexpected territory." "By staying true to what matters," Michelle said, the words coming with a certainty she hadn't felt in months. "By remembering why we're doing what we're doing," Reynolds nodded approvingly. "You know, when Wilson designed this network of trusted contacts, what eventually became our organization, he included profiles of the types of people who might someday continue his work. One category was the reluctant guardian, someone who stumbles into a critical role not through ambition, but through circumstance, and rises to the challenge out of necessity." Michelle recognized herself in that description. She hadn't sought this responsibility, but now that it had found her, she couldn't turn away from it. "The briefing packages should reach their destinations by morning," Reynolds continued. "After that, we have arrangements to transport you and Noah to Washington under protection. Are you prepared for what comes next?" Michelle looked down at her sleeping son, then back at the stars overhead. The ranch that had seemed like such a desperate last resort had led them here to this moment, this responsibility, this chance to make a difference that extended far beyond their personal struggles. "Yes," she answered with quiet confidence. "We're ready." The next morning brought confirmation that all briefing packages had been successfully delivered. The response was swift and decisive. An emergency closed session of the Senate Intelligence Committee was convened, and the Secretary of Defense ordered an immediate security review of the nuclear command and control systems. As Michelle and Noah prepared to depart for Washington, Admiral Reynolds presented her with a secure communications device. "No matter what happens in the coming days, you won't be alone," Reynolds assured her. "Our network will remain available to you both for security and support. What you're doing takes extraordinary courage." Michelle accepted the device, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. "I'm just trying to do what's right. What anyone would do in my position." "Not anyone," Reynolds corrected her. "Most people would have taken the money Thomas Reynolds would undoubtedly have offered for the protocols, or chosen the safety of new identities and disappearance. The path you've chosen to stand publicly for the truth, that's exceptional." As they boarded the unmarked helicopter that would begin their journey to Washington, Michelle took one last look at the desert landscape surrounding the hidden facility. Somewhere out there was the ranch she had purchased, with her last $400, a desperate gamble that had changed everything. Washington, D.C. appeared through the helicopter window as they approached its iconic monuments, glowing in the late afternoon sun. For Michelle, who had visited only twice before for cybersecurity conferences, the city represented both the highest ideals of American democracy and the complex, sometimes troubling reality of power and politics. Now she was arriving not as a tourist or professional attendee, but as someone carrying information that could potentially shake the highest levels of government. Their landing wasn't at any commercial or military airport, but on a private helipad at a secure facility in Virginia. A small delegation waited for them, two uniformed military officers and a civilian woman in a crisp suit who introduced herself as Special Counsel Diane Lawson from the Department of Justice. "Ms. Cooper," Lawson greeted her with a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming. I understand the circumstances are extraordinary. We've arranged secure accommodations for you and your son, while preparations are made for your testimony. Michelle kept a protective arm around Noah's shoulders as they were escorted to an armored SUV. "What's the status of the information packages?" she asked, wanting to confirm that Wilson's protocols were being taken seriously. "The Secretary of Defense has personally convened a technical working group to analyze the protocols," one of the military officers informed her. "Preliminary assessments confirm Colonel Wilson's findings. The vulnerabilities appear to exist in current systems." This confirmation both vindicated their efforts and underscored the gravity of the situation. For 3 decades, a small group had maintained secret access to bypass critical safeguards in the nuclear command structure, an unthinkable breach of security and public trust. They were driven to a comfortable but clearly secure government guest house in a quiet diplomatic area of the city. While outwardly it resembled a high-end hotel, Michelle noted the subtle security measures, reinforced windows, surveillance systems, and the unobtrusive but ever-present security personnel. "These will be your quarters until the hearings conclude," Lawson explained, as they were shown to a 2-bedroom suite. "For security reasons, we ask that you remain on the premises unless accompanied by authorized personnel. Everything you need can be brought to you." After ensuring they were settled, Lawson outlined the coming days. "Tomorrow morning, you'll meet with the Joint Intelligence Committee staff for preliminary debriefing. The day after formal testimony begins, closed session initially, though portions may eventually become public record." When they were finally alone, Noah explored the suite with his usual curiosity, while Michelle unpacked their meager belongings. The contrast between their previous circumstances, facing eviction from a weekly rate motel, and their current high-security accommodations, wasn't lost on her. "Is this where the president stays when he visits people?" Noah asked, bouncing experimentally on the plush bed in his room. Michelle smiled. "Not exactly, but it's definitely nicer than our motel was." "Or the ranch," Noah added, though without criticism. "But the ranch will be better once we fix it up." His unwavering confidence that they would return to the ranch touched Michelle deeply. Children lived in the present, but also maintained absolute faith in future promises, a combination that adults often lost along the way. That evening, they were visited by a distinguished older man who introduced himself as Director James Thornton of the National Security Agency. His presence indicated the seriousness with which Wilson's protocols were being treated. "Ms. Cooper," he said, after Noah had been settled in the adjacent room with dinner and a movie, "I wanted to personally thank you for bringing this matter forward. The analysis of Colonel Wilson's materials has confirmed our worst fears. These vulnerabilities represent a fundamental breach of our most critical security systems." "Has there been any indication they've ever been utilized?" Michelle asked the question that had been haunting her since decrypting Wilson's files. Director Thornton's expression darkened. "We're conducting a comprehensive audit of all nuclear command activities for the past 30 years. It's painstaking work, but preliminary findings suggest at least 3 incidents where unauthorized access to the system occurred, though thankfully none resulted in actual launch scenarios." The implications were chilling. Someone had not only created these backdoors, but had actually used them to gain unauthorized access to nuclear command systems. "What about Thomas Reynolds and Sentinel Global?" Michelle pressed. "We've identified 8 individuals who appear to be part of this cabal, including Reynolds," Thornton confirmed. 4 are current government officials, 3 are with defense contractors, and 1 is a retired general now working as a private consultant. Surveillance has been established on all of them." "Are they aware of that?" "They know something is happening," Thornton acknowledged. "The emergency security review couldn't be completely concealed, but they don't yet know that we have Wilson's complete protocols or that you're here in Washington. That advantage won't last long once the hearings begin." Before leaving, Director Thornton handed Michelle a secure tablet. "This contains the full briefing materials for tomorrow's meeting. I suggest you review them thoroughly. Your cybersecurity background gives you unique credibility in explaining these technical vulnerabilities to non-specialists." After he departed, Michelle spent hours studying the materials, which included both Wilson's original documentation and the government's preliminary analysis confirming his findings. The technical details were complex, even for someone with her background, but the implications were clear. The very foundation of nuclear security had been compromised for decades. The next morning brought a series of intense preparatory meetings with Intelligence Committee staff. Michelle walked them through Wilson's discoveries, translating the technical aspects into terms the legislators could understand during the upcoming hearings. Throughout, she was impressed by the professionalism and seriousness with which her information was being treated. During a brief break, she called Admiral Reynolds, using the secure device she had been given. "How are things proceeding?" Reynolds asked without preamble. "Better than I expected," Michelle admitted. "They're taking Wilson's protocols seriously. There's already a technical team implementing his security fixes. And Sentinel, under surveillance but not yet detained. I gather they're waiting to build a comprehensive case." Reynolds's voice took on a note of caution. "Be careful, Michelle. Cornered adversaries are the most dangerous. These people have spent decades protecting their access to these systems. They won't surrender that power easily." The warning proved prescient. That evening, as Michelle and Noah were finishing dinner in their suite special counsel, Lawson arrived with disturbing news. "We've had a security breach," she informed Michelle tersely. "Someone within the Intelligence Committee staff leaked information about your presence in Washington and the nature of your testimony. Thomas Reynolds and his associates have gone to ground disappeared before they could be brought in for questioning." Michelle felt a chill of apprehension. What does this mean for tomorrow's hearing? "It proceeds as planned but with enhanced security," Lawson assured her. "We're moving you and Noah to a different location tonight as a precaution." Within the hour, they were relocated to a military installation outside the city, a stark contrast to their previous comfortable accommodations, but undeniably secure. Noah, remarkably adaptable, treated the whole experience as an adventure, especially when their military escorts gave him a special patch designating him as an honorary security officer. "See, Mom? Now I'm helping protect you," he said proudly, the oversized patch dominating his small shoulder. Michelle hugged him tightly, marveling at his resilience. "You always have Buddy, more than you know." That night, as Noah slept in the adjacent room of their new quarters, Michelle prepared herself mentally for the next day's testimony. She would be speaking not just to members of Congress, but to history itself, revealing a 3-decade conspiracy that had undermined one of the nation's most critical security systems. The weight of responsibility was immense, but so was the clarity of purpose she now felt. For months after losing her job, she had struggled with a loss of professional identity and direction. Now, ironically, her desperate purchase of a foreclosed ranch had led her to the most important application of her expertise she could imagine. Morning came too quickly. Michelle dressed carefully in the professional attire that had been provided for her, a conservative suit that projected competence and credibility. After ensuring Noah was settled with a childcare specialist who had security clearance, she was escorted to the Capitol under heavy protection. The hearing room was imposing wood-paneled walls, an elevated committee dais, and the weight of national security decisions that had been made within these walls over decades. Michelle was shown to a witness table with a microphone and water pitcher facing the semicircle of senators and representatives who comprised the Joint Intelligence Committee. The committee chairman, Senator Marshall, began the proceedings with unusual solemnity. "This closed session has been convened to address what appears to be one of the most significant security breaches in our nation's history. Our witness today, Michelle Cooper, has provided documentation suggesting that unauthorized access points were deliberately built into our nuclear command and control systems, and that these vulnerabilities have persisted for nearly 30 years. Michelle was sworn in the formal oath underscoring the gravity of her testimony. Then for nearly 2 hours, she methodically presented what she had discovered at Wilson's bunker, the hidden protocols, his detailed documentation of the vulnerabilities, and the evidence that a small group had maintained these backdoors through multiple system upgrades. Her cybersecurity background proved invaluable as she explained complex technical concepts in terms the committee members could understand. Several times, technical experts from the Defense Department were called to corroborate specific details, each confirmation adding weight to her testimony. Ms. Cooper, Senator Marshall asked after her initial presentation concluded, "In your professional assessment, what would have been possible if someone utilized these back doors?" Michelle chose her words carefully. These vulnerabilities would have allowed unauthorized users to bypass the two-person authentication requirement for nuclear launch commands. In essence, it created the possibility for a single individual with the right access codes to initiate launch sequences without the normal verification protocols. A murmur ran through the committee members. The two-person rule was a fundamental safeguard in nuclear command systems, ensuring that no single individual, not even the president, could initiate a nuclear launch unilaterally. And you believe these backdoors were deliberately created? Not accidental vulnerabilities, another committee member pressed. Colonel Wilson's documentation is quite clear on this point, Michelle confirmed. The code structures identified show intentional design, not programming errors. Someone specifically engineered these access points and then concealed them within the larger system architecture. The questioning continued for hours, delving into technical details, the timeline of events, and Michelle's own involvement. Throughout, she maintained her composure, even when certain committee members seemed skeptical of her account or protective of long-standing defense institutions. During a brief recess, Special Counsel Lawson approached Michelle with an update. "You're doing exceptionally well," she said quietly. "The technical teams have confirmed everything in Wilson's protocols. They're implementing his security fixes as we speak." "What about Thomas Reynolds and his associates?" Michelle asked. Lawson's expression tightened. "Still missing, but we've frozen their assets and issued federal warrants. They won't get far." When the hearing resumed, the focus shifted to the current threat. "Ms. Cooper," the committee chair asked, "in your view, what remains to be done to secure these systems properly?" Michelle straightened in her chair, moving from witness to expert, a transition that felt both natural and empowering. Three things are critical. First, Wilson's corrected protocols must be fully implemented across all nuclear command systems. Second, a comprehensive security audit needs to identify any other potential vulnerabilities these individuals might have created. And third, she paused, knowing her next point might be controversial. We need greater transparency in how these systems are designed and monitored. The very secrecy that was meant to protect these systems ultimately allowed this vulnerability to persist for decades. The hearing concluded late in the afternoon, with the committee voting unanimously to establish a special oversight task force to address the vulnerabilities and investigate those responsible. As Michelle gathered her materials, several committee members approached to thank her personally for her courage in coming forward. "You've performed an extraordinary service to your country today," Senator Marshall told her. "History may never know exactly what catastrophes were averted by your actions, but those of us in this room certainly do." As Michelle was escorted from the Capitol, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the truth was finally exposed, concern for what might still lie ahead, and a surprising sense of professional fulfillment. For the first time in months, she had applied her expertise to a problem that truly mattered, and she had done so effectively. The next 3 days brought a whirlwind of activity. Michelle provided additional testimony to military investigators and technical teams implementing Wilson's security fixes. Noah remained under protection at the military installation, where he had become something of a mascot to the security personnel who taught him card games and basic self-defense moves during their off-duty hours. On the fourth day, Special Counsel Lawson arrived with significant news. "We've apprehended Thomas Reynolds and 4 others," she announced. "They were attempting to leave the country on falsified diplomatic credentials." "What about the others?" Michelle asked. "2 turned themselves in and are cooperating in exchange for consideration in sentencing. 1 remains at large, but we've identified his location and expect to have him in custody within hours." The swift resolution of the immediate threat brought a measure of relief, but Michelle knew the larger implications would take years to fully address. The vulnerability in the nuclear command systems had been exposed and was being corrected. But the fact that it had existed at all, and had been deliberately created and maintained by trusted officials, would require a fundamental reevaluation of how critical security systems were designed and overseen. Later that evening, Director Thornton visited their quarters with an unexpected proposal. Ms. Cooper, your expertise has proven invaluable throughout this crisis. The President has authorized me to offer you a position heading a new cybersecurity integrity division within the NSA focused specifically on ensuring our most critical systems remain free from unauthorized modifications. The offer was stunning, a direct appointment to a senior government position with significant responsibility and the chance to ensure that vulnerabilities like those Wilson had discovered could never again remain hidden for decades. I'm honored, Michelle said sincerely. But I need to consider what's best for my son. We've been through a lot of upheaval recently. Of course. Thornton nodded. The position would be based here in Washington with excellent schools nearby and housing provided. Your son would have stability and security, and you would be doing work of vital national importance. Michelle promised to consider the offer carefully. But that night, as she watched Noah sleeping peacefully, her thoughts returned repeatedly to the ranch they had so briefly called home. The city would offer advantages, professional opportunities, educational resources, financial security, but something about the ranch had spoken to both of them in a way that transcended practical considerations. The next morning, Michelle received an unexpected call on her secure line. It was Admiral Reynolds. I understand you've been offered a position with the NSA, Reynolds said without preamble. News travels fast, Michelle remarked. Yes, Director Thornton approached me yesterday. It's a good offer, Reynolds acknowledged. Important work that matches your expertise. But before you decide, I wanted you to know there's another option. Reynolds explained that her network of former intelligence professionals had been impressed by Michelle's handling of the Wilson protocols. They were establishing a new cybersecurity consulting firm focused on identifying vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure systems, private sector work, but with significant public impact. We'd like you to head our technical division, Reynolds offered. The position would allow you to work primarily remotely with occasional travel. You could live wherever you choose, including that ranch you and your son seem so attached to. The alternative was compelling, meaningful work that utilized her skills, but with the freedom to create the life she wanted for Noah away from Washington politics and bureaucracy. I'll need to think about both offers, Michelle said honestly. Of course, Reynolds replied. But whatever you decide, know that what you've done these past weeks has already changed the course of history, even if most people will never know the details. That afternoon, Michelle requested a meeting with Director Thornton and Special Counsel Lawson to discuss her future plans and to ask one critical question. What's happening with the Riverstone Ranch? It's still yours, Lawson confirmed. Though given what was found there was some discussion of government acquisition. However, the bunker itself has been thoroughly documented and its contents secured. The property itself poses no ongoing security concern. The ranch was my fresh start, Michelle explained. Bought with my last dollars when we were facing eviction. It may sound strange given everything that's happened, but both Noah and I feel connected to that place. Director Thornton studied her thoughtfully. You're considering declining our offer to return there. I'm considering all my options, Michelle clarified, including a private sector position that would allow remote work. Rather than appearing disappointed, Thornton seemed to understand. The kind of courage you've demonstrated these past weeks is rare, Ms. Cooper. So is the expertise you bring to cybersecurity challenges. The country needs people like you, but that service can take many forms. By the following week, all immediate threats had been neutralized. Thomas Reynolds and his associates were in custody. Wilson's security fixes had been fully implemented across all nuclear command systems, and a comprehensive review was underway to identify any other potential vulnerabilities. Michelle and Noah were cleared to return to Arizona with appropriate security measures in place until the legal proceedings against the Sentinel group concluded. Before leaving Washington, Michelle made her decision she would accept Admiral Reynolds' offer, allowing her to do meaningful cybersecurity work while rebuilding the ranch with Noah. As their plane descended toward Phoenix, Noah pressed his face against the window, his excitement palpable. "Can we go straight to the ranch, Mom?" Michelle squeezed his hand. "Absolutely. It's time to go home." The last rays of sunset were painting the desert gold as their government-provided SUV turned onto the familiar dirt road leading to the Riverstone Ranch. Michelle's breath caught as the property came into view. After all they had been through, after all the revelations and dangers, the simple adobe structure still standing amid the rugged beauty of the Arizona landscape brought tears to her eyes. Home. Against all odds, they had found their way back. Noah was out of the vehicle almost before it stopped running toward the house with unbridled joy. Michelle followed more slowly, taking in the property with new eyes. What had initially seemed like a desperate last resort now represented something profoundly different. A choice, a future, a sanctuary of their own. The bunker remained its secrets, now known to those who needed to know them. But the land itself, the wide desert skies, the mountains turning purple in the distance, the promise of renewal that belonged to Michelle and Noah alone. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Michelle stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching Noah chase fireflies in the yard. Tomorrow would bring the challenges of repairs, of setting up her remote workstation, of truly making this place livable. But tonight, it was enough to simply be here, to have found their way through an impossible situation and back to the beginning. The ranch had cost her last $400, but what it had given them in return was beyond price, purpose, adventure, and now finally a true home. Dawn broke over the Riverstone Ranch, casting long shadows across the desert floor and bathing the adobe walls of the house in warm golden light. Michelle Cooper stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching as the first rays of sun illuminated the rugged landscape. 3 weeks had passed since their return from Washington, and each morning brought the same moment of quiet disbelief. This place, this improbable sanctuary purchased with her last $400 in a moment of desperation, was truly theirs. Behind her, the ranch house was already stirring to life. Noah was helping Jack Morris unload supplies from his truck. The retired Navy SEAL had become a regular fixture at the ranch, arriving most mornings with tools, building materials, or simply his decades of practical knowledge. Today they were continuing work on the roof repairs, a project that had taken on new urgency with the monsoon season approaching. "Think we'll finish the west section today?" Michelle called to them. Jack adjusted his weathered ball cap, squinting up at the damaged portion of the roof. "Should do. Got some extra hands coming by later, couple of my buddies from the VFW. One of 'em was a contractor for 30 years before retiring." The unexpected support from the Riverstone community had been one of the most surprising developments since their return. Word had somehow spread, not the classified details of course, but enough for people to understand that Michelle had done something significant for national security. What had begun with Jack Morris and his hardware store generosity had expanded into a loose network of retirees, veterans, and locals who seemed determined to help restore the ranch. The irony wasn't lost on Michelle. After spending years in the isolation of high-tech corporate environments, she had found genuine community in this remote desert outpost. People here valued action over words, showing up with practical help rather than empty promises. As she watched Jack patiently showing Noah how to measure and cut replacement tiles, Michelle reflected on how different their lives had become in just a few short weeks. Her remote work for Admiral Reynolds' new cybersecurity firm Integrity Systems had begun with a comprehensive security assessment of critical infrastructure networks. The bunker beneath the ranch, now officially decommissioned as a classified facility, but repurposed as her secure home office, provided the perfect workspace for sensitive projects. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew Michelle's attention. A dust cloud rose from the access road as a government-issue SUV made its way toward the ranch house. These visits had become less frequent as the legal proceedings against Thomas Reynolds and his Sentinel Global associates progressed, but security protocols still required regular check-ins. The vehicle came to a stop and Special Agent Carla Rodriguez emerged. Unlike the intimidating presence of Thomas Reynolds, Agent Rodriguez represented the legitimate face of government oversight, professional, transparent, and respectful of boundaries. "Morning, Ms. Cooper," she called, making her way to the porch. "Just the routine check-in. Brought those security system upgrades we discussed last week." "Coffee," Michelle offered, gesturing to the pot keeping warm on the small patio table. "Wouldn't say no," Rodriguez replied with a smile. "Beautiful morning out here. I'm starting to see why you chose this place over Washington." They settled on the porch, the conversation shifting between official updates on the Sentinel case and more casual observations. This, too, was part of the new normal, the delicate balance between maintaining security protocols and rebuilding a sense of ordinary life. "How's the testimony preparation coming along?" Rodriguez asked, nodding toward the stack of documents on the table. Michelle sighed. "Getting there. The congressional hearings next month will be the most public phase yet. My lawyers are confident, but it's still daunting." "You'll do fine," Rodriguez assured her. "The evidence is overwhelming and the technical aspects have already been verified by multiple agencies. Your role is simply to connect the human dots, how you found the bunker, what Wilson documented in his journals, the personal story." "Nothing simple about that," Michelle replied, though without bitterness. The decision to pursue accountability rather than anonymity had come with costs, the scrutiny, the legal complexities, the occasional nightmares. But watching Noah thrive despite everything reinforced her conviction that they had made the right choice. After completing her security check and installing the upgraded monitoring equipment, Rodriguez prepared to leave. "Oh, almost forgot," she said, returning to her vehicle. "Director Thornton asked me to deliver this personally." She handed Michelle a heavy envelope bearing the NSA seal. "What's this?" Michelle asked, weighing it in her hand. "No idea. Above my pay grade," Rodriguez replied with professional discretion. "But he seemed to think you'd be pleased." After the agent departed, Michelle opened the envelope to find a letter from Director Thornton, along with a set of official documents. The letter was brief but profound, Ms. Cooper. Enclosed, you'll find the formal commendation that will be presented at next month's closed hearing. While public recognition must remain limited due to the classified nature of Wilson's protocols, please know that your actions have closed a critical security vulnerability that existed for over 30 years. Our technical teams have now completed the implementation of Colonel Wilson's corrected authentication systems across all nuclear command platforms. The two-person verification system is now fully secured against the type of bypass capabilities that Sentinel sought to preserve. You were offered a choice between safety in anonymity and the harder path of accountability. Your decision speaks to the highest traditions of civic courage. History may not record your contribution as it deserves, but those of us who understand its significance will not forget. James Thornton, Director, National Security Agency. Beneath the letter lay the formal commendation, its language carefully crafted to acknowledge her service while preserving necessary classification. What struck Michelle most, however, was a separate document, the official deed to the Riverstone Ranch, now cleared of all potential government claims or security restrictions. The property was unequivocally hers, a permanent home for her and Noah. Michelle sat for a long moment, the papers in her lap, watching the activity around the ranch. Jack and Noah had been joined by two older men who were unloading lumber from a pickup truck. At the far corral, the local veterinarian was checking on the two rescue horses they had adopted last week, Noah's dream of a real ranch coming to life one piece at a time. "Mom," Noah called, running toward her with the boundless energy of childhood. "Mr. Jack says we're going to start on my room next. Can I have blue walls? Really blue, not baby blue?" Michelle smiled, tucking the documents back into their envelope. "Absolutely. The bluest blue we can find." The congressional hearing room buzzed with subdued conversation as staffers, security personnel, and committee members prepared for the day's testimony. Unlike the closed sessions that had characterized the early phases of the investigation, today's hearing would be partially open to the public, a carefully balanced compromise between transparency and national security. Michelle sat in the preparation room reviewing her notes one final time. Her testimony had been meticulously crafted to present the factual narrative without revealing classified technical details. The focus would be on the human story, how a desperate purchase of a foreclosed ranch had led to the discovery of Colonel Wilson's hidden bunker and the subsequent revelation of the Sentinel Group's decades-long manipulation of nuclear security protocols. 5 minutes, Ms. Cooper, a staff member announced, poking his head into the room. Michelle nodded, smoothing the lapel of her navy suit, a far cry from the worn jeans and work shirts that had become her daily uniform at the ranch. Noah was back in Arizona staying with Jack Morris and his wife for the 3 days Michelle would be in Washington. The arrangement had relieved one source of anxiety. Noah had come to trust the retired SEAL as a grandfather figure, and the Morris home had become a second sanctuary for him. Admiral Reynolds entered the preparation room, her formal uniform replacing the civilian clothes Michelle had grown accustomed to seeing her wear. "Ready?" she asked simply. "As I'll ever be," Michelle replied, gathering her materials. "Remember, this isn't just about prosecution," Reynolds said. "It's about correcting the historical record. What Wilson did 30 years ago wasn't treason or defection, it was an act of profound patriotism. Your testimony helps complete what he started." They walked together to the hearing room where Michelle took her place at the witness table. Across from her sat the members of the special congressional committee established to investigate what had become known in classified circles as the Wilson Protocols case. In the limited public gallery, carefully screened attendees waited for the proceedings to begin. Senator Marshall, chairing the committee, called the session to order with a brief statement for the public record. "Today, we continue our investigation into one of the most significant breaches of nuclear security protocols in American history. The committee will hear testimony from Michelle Cooper, whose discovery of Colonel Robert Wilson's hidden facility led to the identification and correction of critical vulnerabilities in our nation's nuclear command systems." Michelle was sworn in, the weight of the oath settling on her shoulders as she promised to tell the truth. A truth so extraordinary that parts of it would remain classified for decades to come. "Ms. Cooper," Senator Marshall began, "please describe for the committee how you came to purchase the property known as the Riverstone Ranch." Michelle leaned toward the microphone. "I was facing eviction with my 9-year-old son. After being laid off from my position as a cybersecurity analyst 14 months earlier, I had exhausted nearly all my financial resources. The ranch was being sold at a county foreclosure auction with a minimum bid of $400, which happened to be almost exactly what I had left in my bank account. And you had no prior knowledge of Colonel Wilson or the significance of the property." "None whatsoever," Michelle confirmed. "It was simply the only housing option within my financial reach. The condition of the property explained the low price. It had significant damage and no functioning utilities. Most people wouldn't consider it habitable." "Yet you did," Senator Marshall observed. "I grew up in rural Colorado," Michelle explained. "I had experience with remote living and basic structural repairs. And frankly, Senator, I had no alternatives." The questioning continued methodically, guiding Michelle through the discovery of the hidden key, the exploration of the bunker, and her first encounter with Thomas Reynolds. When they reached the contents of Wilson's journal, the committee moved to a closed session, clearing the public gallery for the classified portions of her testimony. For the next 2 hours, Michelle detailed the technical aspects of Wilson's discoveries, the deliberate vulnerabilities inserted into the nuclear authentication systems, the corrected protocols he had developed, and the evidence that Sentinel Global had actively worked to maintain these backdoor access points through successive system upgrades. "Based on your cybersecurity expertise," one committee member asked, "what would have been the potential consequences if these vulnerabilities had been exploited?" Michelle chose her words carefully. "The two-person authentication requirement for nuclear launch commands exists for a crucial reason, to ensure that no single individual can initiate such a momentous and irreversible action. The vulnerabilities Wilson identified would have allowed authorized users with specialized knowledge to circumvent this fundamental safeguard. In essence, It created the possibility for a nuclear launch to be initiated outside the official chain of command. The implications hung heavily in the air. For 3 decades, a small group of individuals had maintained secret access to what should have been the most secure systems in existence. And you believe Colonel Wilson's actions in 1989, taking the corrected protocols and disappearing, were justified? Another member pressed. I believe Colonel Wilson faced an impossible choice, Michelle replied. He discovered a critical vulnerability, reported it through proper channels, and found that certain officials wanted to preserve it as a feature rather than eliminate it as a flaw. His options were to accept this decision, knowing it compromised the fundamental security architecture of our nuclear systems, or to preserve the corrected protocols until they could be properly implemented. The fact that these corrected protocols have now been fully integrated into our current systems with the unanimous support of the Joint Chiefs and the Nuclear Command Authority suggests his technical assessment was correct. By late afternoon, the public session resumed for Michelle's final statements. The committee room had filled again, this time with more press representatives who sensed the historical significance of the proceedings. Ms. Cooper, Senator Marshall concluded, you made a choice to come forward with Colonel Wilson's materials rather than pursue other options that might have been personally safer or more financially rewarding. Could you share with the committee why you made that decision? Michelle paused, looking down at her notes before raising her eyes to meet the senator's gaze. I'm a single mother, Senator. Every decision I make shapes the person my son will become. When we found ourselves at the center of this extraordinary situation, I had to ask myself what lesson I wanted to teach him. That when confronted with corruption or wrongdoing, the appropriate response is to run and hide, or that standing for truth matters even when it's difficult. She took a breath, her voice strengthening. Colonel Wilson spent the last 30 years of his life in isolation, protecting information that he believed was vital to our national security. He could have destroyed those protocols before his death, but he chose to preserve them, trusting that someday the right person would find them and complete what he started. I don't know if I was that person, but once the responsibility fell to me, I couldn't turn away from it. As the hearing concluded, several committee members approached to thank Michelle personally. What had begun in fear and uncertainty, a desperate mother using her last dollars to buy a dilapidated ranch, had transformed into something profound: the correction of a 3-decade security vulnerability, and the vindication of a patriot who had sacrificed his reputation to protect his country. Outside the Capitol, the autumn sun was setting over Washington, casting long shadows across the mall. Michelle descended the steps, finding Admiral Reynolds waiting by a government car. You did well in there, Reynolds said, her typically reserved manner giving way to genuine approval. Wilson would have been proud. I hope so, Michelle replied. It feels like I've been carrying his legacy these past months. And now? Reynolds asked as they settled into the car. Michelle gazed out at the monuments passing by, symbols of the democracy Wilson had sought to protect. Now I go home. Back to the ranch, back to Noah. Back to rebuilding what's ours. Winter in the Arizona desert brought crystalline air and night temperatures that approached freezing, but the days remained gloriously sunny. 4 months after the congressional hearings, the Riverstone Ranch had undergone a transformation that sometimes left Michelle blinking in disbelief when she stepped outside each morning. The roof had been completely repaired, the plumbing and electrical systems modernized, and solar panels installed on a purpose-built array behind the house. The 1972 Ford F-150 that had been abandoned in the barn now purred with renewed life, restored by Jack Morris and his veterans group as a surprise for Michelle's birthday. Its faded blue paint had been buffed and waxed to a soft sheen that captured the desert light. Most significantly, Wilson's bunker had been repurposed into a state-of-the-art secure facility where Michelle conducted her work for integrity systems. The advanced communications equipment, retrofitted with modern technology, provided capabilities that would have been the envy of her former corporate office. The irony wasn't lost on her. She now had better resources in this remote desert location than she'd had in downtown Phoenix. On this particular December morning, Michelle sat at her workstation in the converted bunker, reviewing the security assessment she had completed for a major electrical grid operator. The work was challenging and meaningful, exactly what she had hoped for when accepting Admiral Reynolds's offer. Most importantly, it allowed her to maintain the life she and Noah were building at the ranch. Her secure phone chirped with an incoming call. The display showed Director Thornton's office, an unusual development as their communications typically went through official channels. "Ms. Cooper." Thornton's voice came through clearly. "I hope I'm not interrupting important work." "Not at all, Director," Michelle replied, saving her report. "What can I do for you?" "I'm calling with some news that I thought you should hear directly from me," Thornton said. The final sentencing in the Sentinel case came down this morning. Thomas Reynolds received 20 years for conspiracy against the United States and unauthorized access to classified defense systems. The others received sentences ranging from 10 to 18 years. Michelle absorbed this information silently. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising speed, accelerated by several defendants' decisions to cooperate in exchange for leniency. "There's more," Thornton continued. "The President has authorized a posthumous Presidential Medal of Freedom for Colonel Wilson. The ceremony will be private due to the classified nature of his contributions, but his service record has been officially cleared. He died a patriot, not a defector." "That would have meant everything to him," Michelle said softly, thinking of the meticulous journals Wilson had left behind, his desperate hope that someday his actions would be understood. "There's one final item," Thornton added. "The President has also authorized a civilian service medal for you. Given the public testimony you provided, this can be acknowledged openly. The ceremony is scheduled for next month in Washington, if you're willing to attend." Michelle hesitated, conflicted emotions washing over her. Public recognition had never been her motivation, and the prospect of returning to Washington brought back the stress of the hearings and depositions. "I understand if you're reluctant," Thornton said, interpreting her silence correctly. "But there's something else to consider. Colonel Wilson never lived to see his work completed or his name cleared. You have that opportunity. Sometimes public recognition isn't just about the individual, it's about acknowledging the importance of what they stood for." After ending the call, Michelle sat motionless, considering Thornton's words. The bunker around her, Wilson's legacy, seemed to whisper its own counsel. The man who had built this place had spent his final years in isolation, protecting a truth he believed in, never knowing if it would matter in the end. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of boots on the metal stairs leading down to the bunker. Noah appeared, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, you gotta come see. The new horse is here and she's beautiful." Michelle smiled, setting aside her contemplation for the moment. "Lead the way, cowboy." They emerged into the winter sunshine to find Jack Morris helping a local rancher unload a chestnut mare from a trailer. The horse, a gentle former barrel racer past her competition days, was to be a companion for their two rescue horses, and Jack insisted the perfect mount for Noah to learn serious riding skills. "What do you think?" Noah asked, his eyes shining as he cautiously approached the mare. "She's perfect," Michelle agreed, watching as the horse lowered her head to inspect Noah with liquid brown eyes. The connection between them was immediate and unmistakable. "We're gonna call her Phoenix," Noah announced, "because she's starting over just like us." Jack, overhearing this, caught Michelle's eye with an approving nod. At 72, the retired SEAL had become an unexpected constant in their lives, mentor, neighbor, and the grandfather figure Noah had never had. His gruff exterior concealed a profound understanding of what it meant to rebuild a life from fragments. Later that afternoon, as Noah took his first carefully supervised riding lesson in the corral, Michelle found herself joined on the porch by Margaret Hayes, the local librarian who had been Colonel Wilson's friend during his years at the ranch. "He would have loved seeing this place alive again," Margaret observed, watching Noah's determined concentration as he learned to guide the mare with subtle shifts of weight and gentle rein pressure. "Robert was a solitary man by necessity, not by nature. He always said the hardest part of his choice was the isolation. Michelle nodded, thinking of the countless hours Wilson must have spent in the bunker below, maintaining his vigilance year after year. I keep wondering if he ever doubted himself, if he ever questioned whether he had done the right thing. Oh, he questioned constantly, Margaret replied. That was Robert's nature, meticulous, analytical, always weighing and measuring. But doubt, no. He understood the stakes too well for doubt. They sat in companionable silence, watching as Jack demonstrated proper posture in the saddle, his decades-old rodeo skills evident in every movement. Director Thornton called today, Michelle said finally. They're giving Wilson a Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously, and they want to give me a Civilian Service Medal at a public ceremony. Margaret's weathered face creased in a smile. You sound less than thrilled. It feels, I don't know, unnecessary, I guess. The important thing was fixing the security vulnerabilities. That's done now. Symbols matter, Margaret said gently. Not just for the public or the history books, but for the people who come after you. Young women considering careers in cybersecurity. Officials facing ethical dilemmas similar to Wilson's. Sometimes seeing someone honored for doing the right thing makes it easier for others to follow that path. The wisdom in these words settled over Michelle slowly. She thought of Noah watching her navigate these extraordinary circumstances, absorbing lessons about courage and integrity that would shape his understanding of the world. I suppose I could manage one more trip to Washington, she conceded with a small smile. As long as Noah can come too, he should see this part of the story. Absolutely, Margaret agreed. Endings matter as much as beginnings. The East Room of the White House gleamed with polished hardwood and historical gravitas as Michelle and Noah were escorted to their seats. Noah, uncharacteristically subdued in his first suit, gazed wide-eyed at the ornate surroundings and the assembled dignitaries. Are all these people here because of what we found at our ranch? He whispered, clearly struggling to connect their desert home with this bastion of power and ceremony. Some of them, Michelle replied softly. Others are here for different awards, but what we found was important enough for the president to notice. The ceremony proceeded with practiced dignity, citations read, medals presented, photographs taken. When Michelle's turn came, she rose and walked to the podium with measured steps, acutely aware of Noah watching from the front row, Jack Morris and Admiral Reynolds seated protectively on either side of him. The president's words were carefully crafted, acknowledging her exceptional service in identifying and helping to address critical security vulnerabilities, without revealing classified details. As the medal was placed around her neck, Michelle thought of Wilson, the solitary guardian whose work she had completed. In that moment, she felt the weight not just of the medal, but of the responsibility it represented. The official photographer captured the handshake, the medal, the formal smile. But it was the unofficial moment afterward that would remain etched in Michelle's memory. Noah rushing forward to hug her tightly, his face upturned with pure pride, whispering, "You did it, Mom. You really did it." Later, at the small reception following the ceremony, Director Thornton approached with an elderly man Michelle didn't recognize. "Ms. Cooper, I'd like you to meet Dr. Edward Conley. He was Colonel Wilson's commanding officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base before the incident in 1989. The man extended a trembling hand. "I've waited a long time to meet the person who finally completed Robert's work," he said, his voice wavering with age but his eyes clear and direct. "I was one of the few who knew what he had discovered. I advised him to go through official channels to trust the system." A shadow crossed his weathered face. "It was the worst advice I ever gave. When he disappeared with those protocols, I understood what he must have encountered higher up the chain." "You couldn't have known," Michelle said gently. "Perhaps not," Dr. Conley acknowledged. "But I've carried that regret for 30 years. When I heard that his protocols had finally been implemented, that his name had been cleared." He paused, emotion overtaking him momentarily. "Well, it felt like a weight had been lifted, not just from his memory, but from my conscience." This, Michelle realized, was part of what Margaret had meant about symbols and ceremonies. The public recognition wasn't just for her, it was for all those connected to Wilson's story, a chance for resolution and healing that transcended the technical fixes to the security systems. As the reception concluded, Admiral Reynolds joined Michelle and Noah. "Ready to head back to Arizona tomorrow?" she asked. "More than ready," Michelle confirmed. "The ranch won't run itself." Reynolds smiled, the formal military bearings softening slightly. "You know, when Wilson designed his contingency plans, the network that eventually became our organization, he included specific criteria for the type of person who might someday continue his work. Someone with technical expertise, but also moral clarity. Someone who would recognize the importance of what he had protected and have the courage to bring it to light." "He couldn't have known who would find the bunker," Michelle pointed out. "It could have been anyone who bought that property." "Perhaps," Reynolds conceded. "Or perhaps there's a certain inevitability to how these things unfold. The right person at the right moment." She glanced at Noah, who was happily collecting souvenir presidential M&M packets from a nearby table. "In either case, the outcome is what matters. The vulnerabilities are fixed. Wilson's legacy is secured, and you and Noah have found your place in the world." Spring transformed the desert around Riverstone Ranch into a brief riot of color wildflowers, carpeting the landscape in yellows, purples, and oranges that seemed almost incongruous against the rugged terrain. Michelle stood at the fence line, watching as Noah guided Phoenix through a series of gentle turns in the corral, his confidence growing with each passing week. Jack Morris sat on the top rail, calling out occasional instructions, but mostly letting Noah work things out himself, a teaching style that perfectly matched the boy's independent nature. In the distance, the renovated ranch house gleamed with fresh paint, its once broken windows now reflecting the clear desert sky. A year had passed since that desperate day when Michelle had spent her last $400 on a foreclosed property that no one else wanted. The journey from that moment to this one had been extraordinary by any measure, from near homelessness to the White House, from unemployment to heading a specialized cybersecurity division, from isolation to finding a community that had embraced them completely. The ranch itself had been transformed. The roof was sound, the plumbing and electrical systems modernized, the solar array providing reliable power. The bunker beneath continued to serve as Michelle's secure office, though its original purpose was now fulfilled. Wilson's protocols had been fully implemented across all nuclear command systems, closing vulnerabilities that had persisted for decades. Most transformative of all was the sense of purpose and belonging that had taken root in both Michelle and Noah. What had begun as a desperate gamble had become a true home, not just the physical structure, but the life they were building together, the community they had joined, the future they could now envision. As Noah completed his writing session and dismounted with growing skill, Michelle felt a familiar presence beside her. Margaret Hayes had arrived with a basket of fresh vegetables from her garden, a weekly ritual that had become part of the rhythm of their lives. "He's becoming quite the horseman," Margaret observed, nodding toward Noah as he carefully led Phoenix through the cool-down routine Jack had taught him. "He is," Michelle agreed. "It's amazing how quickly he's adapted to everything: the ranch, the horses, the whole rural lifestyle. Sometimes I forget he spent most of his life in suburban Phoenix." "Children are resilient," Margaret said, "but they also respond to authenticity. This place suits you both in a way that perhaps your previous life didn't." Michelle considered this, watching as Noah laughed at something Jack had said, the sound carrying clearly across the corral. "I think you're right. Everything before felt temporary somehow, like we were just passing through. This feels like home," Margaret finished for her. "Yes," Michelle agreed. "Exactly like home." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property as they made their way back to the house. Inside, the transformation was equally dramatic: walls, repainted floors, refinished furnishings, gradually accumulated to replace the sparse necessities they had started with. Noah's room was indeed the bluest blue imaginable, decorated with a mixture of space posters and horse photographs that perfectly captured his evolving interests. Later, as the day cooled toward evening, Michelle sat on the porch with her laptop reviewing security assessments for a new client, while Noah worked on homework at the outdoor table. Jack had stayed for dinner as he often did, sharing stories of his SEAL days that had Noah hanging on every word. This was their new normal work and school routine maintenance and special projects, ordinary days punctuated by occasional reminders of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them here. The congressional investigation continued with periodic updates from Special Counsel Lawson. Sentinel Global's assets had been frozen, its government contracts terminated, its leaders facing years in federal prison. Colonel Wilson's story had been partially declassified, allowing for limited public recognition of his service and sacrifice. His posthumous Medal of Freedom now hung in a small display case in Michelle's office, alongside her own civilian service medal, tangible reminders of the path that had led them to this place. As darkness fell, the desert sky transformed into a canopy of stars more vivid than any city dweller could imagine. Noah finished with his homework, brought out his telescope, a gift from the retired CIA analyst who had taught him chess at Sanctuary. "Want to look at Jupiter tonight, Mom?" he asked, already setting up the instrument with practiced ease. "The moons are really clear this time of year." Michelle joined him, watching as he located the planet and focused the telescope with precision beyond his years. As she took her turn looking through the eyepiece, seeing the distant gas giant with its orbiting moons, she was struck by the parallel to their own journey from chaos toward order, from uncertainty toward stability, from isolation toward connection. The ranch had cost her last $400, but what it had given them was beyond price: a home, a purpose, a community, and a chance to make a difference that extended far beyond their personal struggles. In the most unexpected way imaginable, they had found exactly what they needed in the place no one else had wanted. As Noah continued his astronomical observations, pointing out constellations and sharing facts, he had learned Michelle gazed up at the vast desert sky. Somewhere up there, she liked to think Colonel Robert Wilson was finally at peace. His long vigil complete, his faith in the resilience of truth vindicated. The ranch house stood solid behind them, its lights glowing warmly against the desert night. Ahead stretched a future they could now face with confidence, not because it promised to be easy, but because they had discovered their own capacity to weather the unexpected and emerge stronger. From desperate last resort to true sanctuary, from foreclosure auction to home, from $400 gamble to priceless treasure, the journey had transformed not just their circumstances, but themselves. And in the end, that was the most valuable discovery of all. What is the true value of a home? For Michelle Cooper, it began with $400, her last desperate dollars spent on a place no one else wanted. What seemed like the end of her options became the beginning of something profound. A dilapidated ranch purchased in desperation revealed both danger and purpose buried beneath desert sands. Through those sun-baked adobe walls, she and Noah discovered something beyond mere shelter. They found the courage to stand against powerful forces that had compromised the nation's security for decades. They uncovered a patriot's legacy, forgotten, but not lost, waiting for someone with both the skill and integrity to complete what Colonel Wilson had begun 30 years before. The cost was measured in fear, overcome in comfort, abandoned in risks, shouldered when safety beckoned elsewhere. But what they gained transcended the material purpose, restored integrity, honored community, embraced, and a true home finally found. Perhaps that's the deepest truth buried at Riverstone Ranch, that our most desperate choices sometimes lead us exactly where we need to be. And in the quiet moments as the desert stars wheel overhead, one question lingers in the cool night air: what forgotten treasures might be waiting for those with the courage to begin again?